When you drive through a city, how much thought do you give to why things are where they are? Why is this park here? Why do the sidewalks look the way they look? Well, all of that is done for a reason. Somebody or a group of somebodies planned all of that. And right now, those somebodies are planning what your city will look like over the next few decades. This week on the show, we talk to one of those people, Eric Myers.
When you see something built, whether it be a street, a reconstructed street, even a repainted street, that has happened through quite a bit of regulatory oversight, but also just deliberative conversation about what's best for our city.
This is Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. This is the podcast telling the stories of the people who call the Tennessee Valley home. We examine the problems all of us face every day, and we talk to the people working on solutions. I'm Josh Rowe. I'll be your host for this journey. Today we talk to Eric Myers. He is the executive director of the Chattanooga Design Studio. We talk about urban design, which is the art of creating cities, more or less, from deciding what the building should look like and molding the spaces that surround all of those buildings. Well, Eric is one of the people making decisions about how parts of Chattanooga will look for the next several decades. Here is my conversation with Eric Myers.
Boy, what you guys do is really interesting, and we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of that in this conversation. But I want people to, if people clicked on this and they're thinking, well, I don't know who Eric is, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this point.
Thank you, Josh. First of all, I'm originally from Maryland, and I moved to the Chattanooga area through the former Chattanooga Design Studio, which was an outpost of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I'm an architect, and I went to the University of Tennessee in the mid-'90s, and in a study abroad program, learned urban design here in Chattanooga. And so I've been around in different cities in Tennessee, and ultimately made my way back here in about 1999 is the exact date. And worked for that studio during the 21st century waterfront era. Saw a lot of big, bold changes in our downtown during that time period, and have two kids, and my wife teaches. She's an art instructor for Hampton County Education, and we live in North Chattanooga and have for 20 years now. And we absolutely love this city, and there's no other place like it. And so, I love what I do too. I feel really fortunate to have found a passion where I don't really feel like what I do for a living is work.
There's a lot to love about the city, and doing what you do, you get a say so in how, in some level anyway, how things kind of come together in some major projects. And we'll talk about some of the projects, that you're working on here later in this conversation. But I don't think people quite understand. I know I didn't understand. Let me just say me. I didn't understand how much, if you see something being built, if you see a crane downtown, if you see a grocery store go up, like how that process actually works. Someone didn't just buy a lot of land and build a thing. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. Can you explain some of that, of how much conversation that there is, and how much planning there is around when you see something new downtown? I mean, a lot of places, not just downtown, beyond downtown, but specifically, around our downtown. That's really kind of what we're focusing on. So yeah, just how much goes into that.
Quite a bit, and it's wonderful to think that the built environment, it just doesn't happen just like the weather. Mm-hmm. It happens through very intentional conversations. It should happen through intentional conversations. It should happen through extreme collaboration, and really intentional collaboration between lots of different professionals, whether they be engineers, contractors, developers, city officials, so on and so forth. And so when you see something built, whether it be a street, a reconstructed street, even a repainted street, that has happened through quite a bit of regulatory oversight, but also just deliberative conversation about what's best for our city. And I feel really fortunate in what I do and really thankful that I can utilize my gifts in helping inspire those changes to be highly effective and collaborative in their nature.
Yeah. For people who don't understand the term urban design, can you kind of put a fine point on that and kind of like what exactly you're trying to do?
I like to look at it as first and foremost people-centered. No matter whether you're driving a car or riding in transit, you're going to wind up being outside of your car, outside of transit. You're going to wind up being a person that finds themselves in what we call the public realm. And so I think of what our design processes do is optimization, really. We try to optimize from building front to building front. We call that the public realm. That's all of that city surface and city environment that we all share. We should think of them as rooms. We should think of those places as living environments for us. And the more we optimize them for the betterment of movement or staying or our own enjoyment in nature, the better we are. And the more we optimize, the more voices that go into that as well, how that's shaped, the better we are as well. The cities that we all love or point to in Europe, the cities that are thousands of years old happen in that manner. They happen through this thing of civic art. You might think of urban design as civic art.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to think about it because you're right. When you think about the cities that you love, like why do you love that city? Why do you love visiting that place? And what went into making it that way? And yeah, there's always, yeah, it didn't just happen. I can tell by the way that like the lights in your eyes when you talk about this. This is something that I mean, I know you've lived it for a long time, but it's something that you really talking about it excites you.
It's very exciting, and it's exciting to think about how that can affect people's quality of life too. For something as simple as a street tree, for instance, can lower the ambient temperature of the street environment where you're walking, whether you're walking to get a cup of coffee or you're experiencing the place on foot for some other reason. So it really can affect our quality of life, thinking about these environments and the public realm in its totality, right. Not just for one use.
Right. I know I went to a presentation recently where you talked about some of the projects you're working on, I guess currently, and some forward-looking things as well. Let's start with this. I know West Side Evolves is one that's gotten some attention in the news, obviously, and combined with that Ben project, kind of gets talked about together. But this is a separate project. Tell me how that started, if you could.
It started really from a question from the Chattanooga Housing Authority to help the neighborhood known as College Hill Courts, which is the oldest public housing neighborhood in our community, to figure out a way forward from an extremely distressed housing asset. So the Housing Authority, as the owner and maintainer of the public housing in our community and the developer of affordable housing, approached us and asked if we might help with a neighborhood plan that could help position the residents and the neighborhood for a better future. And so our immediate response was that the College Hill Courts area, which is 496 family units, really relies on the success of the surrounding neighborhood, which is about 150 acres between Main Street and ML King and Riverfront Parkway and the Interstate 27 area. And so we launched on that larger plan, which is about a total of 1,500 family units in that footprint. And most all of them are in a lower income bracket or a lower income family unit standard, subsidized or in some manner, shape, or form. And so helping the Housing Authority, helping that neighborhood really envision a transformative future for the neighborhood, that's a really where that project started. Right.
I remember when the Ben project was announced and it was and the TIF conversation happened in City Council. There was a lot of heated rhetoric around that. What I think is interesting, you see that moment, it's kind of a flashpoint in time, right? That when you guys were starting this project, it took you a long time to get here, and it's going to take you a long time to get to the finish point. Like, it's not about, this one moment. Like, no, this is a big part of your life over a period of time. You guys did, I forget the period of time, but you went in and you asked residents, like, what do you want here? What do you, it's not just people in a room making decisions, like you went to the people who live there and said, what do you want? Can you explain that process?
Absolutely. So we started in 2020. We formed a community advisory committee. It's about 25 folks, people that lived in the community prior to, and people that lived in the community currently, and city CHA representatives, area service providers. So that's who made up that committee. We met every single month, even during the pandemic on Zoom. That committee helped guide this process and help really inform us and give us input into where the process should be involved and who it should involve. We were really fortunate when we propped up a survey that was quite extensive that went into family life, education, where do you shop, where do you get your groceries, what are some of the housing challenges that you face, and what's your health, and what are your unmet health needs. It was really extensive about the conditions of the families and current conditions and what families could be facing. It took individuals about 30 minutes to complete that. It tells you how long that is. But we were proud that we had a wonderful resident team that was paid to go stand on porches with tablets and do this safely. So mask up with a tablet,
right,
and ask their neighbors all of the questions on that survey.
Right,
we
had started in 2020. You're at the heart of the pandemic.
The heart of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Tech Goes Home offered us each one of our resident team members a tablet so that all of that could be done digitally and safely. And without that, we wouldn't have gotten 80% participation at College Hill Courts. We wouldn't have gotten the participation that we got. Hundreds and hundreds of surveys about, and it really helped level set and paint a good picture for the conversations that then needed to happen. So we had workshops that were hybrid, virtual, because you remember once we started gathering, we kind of limited the group sizes. And so we had groups of anywhere from 20 to 50, most of whom were Zooming in to those meetings, and large rooms spaced 6 feet apart. And so it's very challenging to do that work in the environment in which we were doing it. But I'm very proud of the residents that they stayed involved. They were very truthful about what they wanted to see, and that's where we're acting right now. And some very simple things, really. Restore the James A. Henry School to its former glory. Find a way to jumpstart early childhood education in the community and adult education in the community. Renovate the Sheila Jennings Park as an asset and a community gathering spot. And it seems really simple, but that's what we heard over and over again from the residents. And that's where we're acting right now, first and foremost. And that's how the TIF fits into this now, is the TIF and the TIF financing.
Right. The
revenue generated from riverfront development right next door can really go into the West Side community and change lives in that way, and those investing in those public spaces like that.
Remind us, if people are listening to this and they've not seen the plans, where can they go to see like what you're trying to do?
Most of all of is on One West Side Chattanooga. The deep dive into the West Side plan that was adopted by council last year is at westsideofolives.com. So it's all spelled out, all scrushed together, no dot. It's westsideofolives.com.
Yeah, I love the fact, right, and I think this is important, right, when you talk about architects or people who are planning a park or whatever that project is, it's not about buildings and trees. You're starting with people who are going to live there. What do you want out of this? What would make you happy in an environment you would want to live in? I mean, I think when it starts there, I think that you can, moving forward, when you start getting a little bit of pushback, you at least have some. Well, no, we went through the processes. We actually talked to people. This is what we learned.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And residents are still very fired up over this. We've had several feedback sessions about the James A. Henry School process, which is a design process that's happening currently, and so residents are still involved and still being asked questions about what do you see? Is this meeting your needs? What else do you want to see here? And so there's still conversations going on about the future, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. Even as the new housing is being planned, I think residents will be involved. There's going to be a lot of input and a lot of dialogue.
So with that input, when you have a session, say a public meeting to talk about ideas, do you get a lot of involvement? Do you get people showing up? I understand that sometimes reaching the right people can be difficult. Tell me about that process as far as getting the people in the room that you really need to hear from.
It's been very challenging, and I'll say that we've learned a lot about the time of day and showing up where people are.
Yeah.
If you have a working family and they live in the West Side, they probably have more than one job, and so they don't have a lot of time to commit elsewhere. And so asking them to come to your meeting that's prescribed at your time, that you think it's going to fit everybody's schedule, really doesn't work. So we have to work a lot with resident councils. We have to work to get the word out, and we have to be available on Saturdays during my family time sometimes. Right. And so that's just what you do, and that's what it means to be committed. It's what it means to be intentional, and to show up with ears to hear from people and listen, and then make action from that.
Yeah, tell me the timeline again. You said you started around 2000. Is that right?
We started in early 2000, and then the plan was adopted last year. And so it's taken 2 years really of.
And what's the end date goal?
When everything's completed?
Yeah.
Really over a decade.
Right. Right.
The plan outlines, and the housing developer that has formed an early partnership with the housing authority at least plans on 8 phases of housing. Mm. So 100 to 200 units each phase of new housing being built. And so you can kind of hear, and if you know phases, 18 months is nothing for a phase of housing to actually get constructed and opened and accept new tenants. And so, yeah, it'll be decades. And it should take decades.
Tell me about that process for you personally, right? When you choose a project that you're okay, we're going to invest our time and energy into this. It's going to be 12 years of your life that's a significant part of your life to be focused on this project. You have to be very intentional and thoughtful in the things that you take on and why you take those on. What do you think about when you take on a project, as far as like what you need to have involved in there before you decide, okay, I'll commit to the next 10 years of thinking about this thing?
Well, we have a belief at the studio that our work has to have generational care, and it's sort of difficult to see that in the timeline of a project that might go for 3 months. Have the checkboxed, however many meetings that you've checked that all off, and then it goes and gets constructed for the next year and a half. How did you really see generational change? How did you really see that as incremental building? Again, let's talk about the cities that we all love. They've been built incrementally over thousands of years. And so how do we see ourselves in a process that's much more incremental? That's much more long-term. I will say this, our role has changed. We did have a very lead role in the planning process, and it was taking quite a bit of our staff capacity. We're sort of a backseat role now. The housing authority in the city of Chattanooga and the housing developer are taking a lead role. And so they're spending quite a bit of the time investment at this point in time. We're still in a supportive role. We still, there's a lot of design need to be met, as we heard through all of that planning process. And so, but yeah, I think it's one reason why when we were asked to be involved, that our board had a very, very serious discussion. We actually had 2 or 3 discussions about whether we do this or not. And I feel like it met our board's but for kind of tests. But for us not being involved, what might happen? Would it probably just be sold? Would the housing authority really, truthfully, how many other ways could this have gone if we would have not partnered and been a good partner and an ally to the housing authority and the residents to do better for everyone there?
Yeah. And with that too, like you said, like there are parts of it that you're very involved in certain parts, and then you kind of pass it on. You also have to be very trusting your partners that you're going to take this thing that you put your heart and soul into, that you're going to, shepherd that and with care in the same way.
That's right. I can't say enough about Betsy McCride as a leader of the housing authority. She's a wonderful inspiration of a leader, and her job is not easy at all.
Right.
And she makes it look very easy. And she approaches every bit of her work with deepest compassion, and I think that means a lot. It means a lot to the residents when they see that. and I can see the housing authority standing up and like meaning that we're going to meet this plan, and we're gonna act on this plan. And the partnership part of our work is similarly important. It really is, because we're in for a long
Sure. And on top of that, right, you talk about 2020 to now, there have been a city mayor election, county mayor election. There will be more before this is over, right? So you could have different mayoral administrations through this that could have different thoughts. That's right. I mean, that's a lot to kind of navigate, from one standpoint, not knowing who might be involved by the end of it.
It is. I think good planning, no matter really what city administration there is, it's recognizable. It's really recognizable, and especially when you've involved as many people as we have and reached out to as many voices involved in the process. I think it just means a lot. Yeah.
One of the other projects you talked about at that presentation was the South Broad Street project, which I didn't know a whole lot about it until I went to that meeting. That's an interesting idea as well. Can you explain some of your thoughts on that and kind of where you are with the planning around that idea?
South Broad or Broad Street?
Broad Street, the Broad Street reimagined.
Broad Street. Yeah. Broad Street's an interesting piece of the public realm of our downtown because it is the widest street that we have in our downtown. It's 125 feet from building face to building face. Yeah. And so when you look at it that way, it's the largest opportunity for this optimization thing that I'm talking about. Like how do we balance all of those space needs for whether it be outdoor dining or multimodal transportation like biking and running and walking and cars, right. Both being parked and moving cars. It seems like it's a logical fit when you look at it in that hand, and its placement is very central to our downtown, that it could accommodate so many needs and we could elevate its presence to a much more park-like street. You might think of it as a park with a street in it.
Right.
And so that's where this notion came from. Again, involving the public, we found out that the public wants it actually to be greener and safer and livelier. And so by those three tenets, we're going to try a configuration change to the street that meets engineering standards. We're not going to do anything that creates an unsafe condition for the public. But how do we promote a much more park-like place?
Yeah. Tell me about the beginning, the origin of that project, because it's one of those things of like, okay, how does someone decide, okay, we have this major street through downtown and we need to do something else with that? Tell me how that started.
It's funny. It came from one of our primary partners, the River City Company, who was also doing a planning process in the middle of the pandemic called the One Riverfront strategy. Right. And out of the One Riverfront strategy, during one of the public meetings, a couple of people that came to the meeting said, hey, this is wonderful. We're talking about reimagining the riverfront, but how can we connect our downtown? It's so important to connect our downtown to the riverfront and to connect everyone that's working downtown, playing downtown, living downtown to the riverfront. And so this notion of Broad Street as a very, very important connector to the riverfront area, to the aquarium, and to the riverfront came out of that study. Yeah. And we really elevated the idea as a major public realm connector from Aquarium Way all the way to ML King.
And so where does that project stand now? Where are you on that as far as that goes? It's like timelines.
We did, so if you remember, we've had some surveys about the configuration options, from broader sidewalks to a promenade street, to the wider median street. We've got a lot of feedback about the results. I will say the results are mixed. Everybody loves sort of the promenade type street or the broader median street. We've taken all of those scenarios into engineering modeling that looks at the traffic analysis. What are the intersection configurations, and right. sees conflicts there as far as vehicular movements go. And we're at that final recommendation stage where we need to load those configurations in. I will say that it looks like that it's very doable to have a promenade type street closer to the aquarium, where you might see market type stalls in the center of the street in a very, very wide median, like La Ramblas in Spain. And then another configuration that where you might see closer to ML King where you might have broader sidewalks that are much deeper sidewalks where outdoor dining and dining al fresco is very, very prominent on that end of the street. And we would save those beautiful willow oak street trees in that part of the street.
Yeah, if someone does want to give their opinion on that, is there a place where that's still open to do that?
I think we have closed the survey, if I remember right, because we're now at the place where the configurations are being studied in the engineering study. We're about to launch out with the final recommendations based on that engineering traffic management study. And then it's a matter of doing what we do best, working with the River City Company and our partners to find a funding strategy that makes the design implementable. One
thing that I thought was interesting in the meeting that we had there was when you talked about traffic in Market Street and the differences. We think of Market and Broad Street almost interchangeably some ways because they're a block apart. They're right in the middle of the town. But traffic on Market Street, even middle of the day, is much heavier than it would be on Broad Street any time of the day. Can you explain that? Just kind of like we must think about what actually happens on specific streets, not just the busyness of, I was downtown that day and I couldn't find a parking spot. So downtown's busy in the middle of the day. Well, parts of it aren't as much.
You're 100% right. So the Market Street has a throughput from North Georgia to North Chattanooga. And it really plays a multimodal role in our community. And each street really does have its own unique role. And that's what makes that's what makes cities really, really interesting and wonderful places. Because if every street was trying to do the same thing, you wouldn't have as much of a lively street. And so that's why thinking about Broad Street and elevating its character and its presence and its use a little bit more to more of a park-like level, because I want to say the last time I looked at the traffic counts are 1/3 that of Market Street. And if you've really been on Market Street any time of the day, you really experienced this, where I think Market Street's got a throughput of about 25,000 annual vehicle count, and Broad Street is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,500 cars.
Wow, yeah.
And so by federal highway standards, anything below about 10,000 annual vehicle count is a candidate for what's known as a road diet, where you might take lanes away from the traditional 4-lane section of a street.
Right. I guess I talked about the traffic on Market and the traffic on, I believe, 4th is what you said, right? The two busy streets downtown, like those are so different than pretty much anywhere else you are downtown.
They are. They have different roles. Again, so 4th Street brings a lot of commuter traffic to downtown, to both UTC, to Unum and the headquarters, the corporate headquarters in the area. But they're also connecting to the medical mall, and so they're connecting so many people from the region to those areas east of downtown, the easternmost parts of downtown. And so it's very important, as we looked at Broad Street and we looked at what I was mentioning about the traffic configurations in the engineering study, Broad and 4th are where it's at, as far as where a lot of the conflicts are going to happen between pedestrians and vehicles and vehicles and vehicles. And so it's important to know how that configuration will adjust those and change those in a safe manner.
You said that you moved back here around 2000, is that what you said? So you've been back for 23 years. So a big part of my reporting is around veterans. And I talk to a lot of World War II veterans. And I will talk to people who grew up in parts of town who will describe that part of town as their childhood. And you can't even imagine it. There was one gentleman I talked to who lived on Pine Street, which is now Power Alley, right? Just right up from, the river, and what that looked like 100 years ago. And you think, boy, I can't envision that. And you think about even the last 23 years. I mean, like our downtown has really been through some transformative changes. You can take different decades or different 20-year periods for that matter. Our downtown is beautiful, but it really has changed a lot, even in the period that you've been back.
Quite a bit. I mean, quite a bit. The 21st Century Water Project was transformative in that there was a limited access highway running. I mean, we basically, in so many terms, declared to the world that we had made it to the river. From the Moccasin Bend plan to the aquarium being built to the Riverwalk, there was a lot of investment made in our city returning to the river, but we still had a 4-lane limited access highway running between the aquarium and the water.
Right.
And so the waterfront plan and that waterfront strategy really helped bringing down the tone of that roadway. And so it's a much more civilized roadway than it was when I first moved back here. And I think that those types of moves sort of rebalance our city into what I think your veterans probably had a lot of experience with. 1920 Chattanooga, if you rewind, even 1930, 35 Chattanooga had vibrant neighborhoods surrounding a downtown connected with one of the largest streetcar networks, rivaling San Francisco.
Right.
And I love the fact that you've interviewed these individuals that remember those time periods. One of my best friends is Eli Cameron at the Bessie Smith Cultural Center, and he talks about his life growing up in the West Side and on Cedar Street next to a Jewish deli, and he lived in a tenement above, and how they used to play stickball in the street on Cedar Street. And you just remember what seems like a very vibrant time period for a lot of people. And we've found so many ways, I think, to be very very specific about the way in which we travel. And I think a return to balancing out or rebalancing roadway systems for a lot more uses than just the throughput of a car is what's needed to really experience a healthy, connected downtown.
Yeah, I remember talking to a man named Ray Chambers, the man who lived on Pine Street, and he was saying, like, when he was a kid, that wasn't considered downtown, right? And you think of it like, well, of course it's downtown, but back when he was growing up in the 1920s and 30s, downtown was, several blocks from where he grew up. And the streetcar thing, I was talking to a man named Billy Lyons, who grew up in a community called Valdo. I had to look it up on the map, which is basically where the Waffle House is at Signal Mountain Road and Dayton Boulevard, right? And he talked about the streetcars that would come and go to Chattanooga to Red Bank. And they would pay a nickel to take a trip to Chattanooga to eat a picnic lunch and that kind of thing. And so, if you look at the history of our town and kind of how people moved around the city, it is fascinating to think about how much has changed over, a generation.
It's a generation.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to hit the Montague sculpture part before we say goodbye here. I know you're working on that as well. Tell us some about the plans for that.
Absolutely. So another request. Scott Martin, who is fairly new. I think he's been almost at it for a year, but he's the new director of the Parks and Outdoors Department at Chattanooga. And thank goodness for what he does. We were approached by Scott to see if we could use our expertise in facilitating a planning process, landscape architecture process for reimagining sculpture fields and unifying sculpture fields into one vision that would include the sculpture fields at Montague Park and the Chattanooga Football Club and youth sports. And so we launched into that process. We did the same thing, as I mentioned, with the West Side Project. We formed a steering committee that would guide us through the process and meeting monthly, doing the same operations. And we first tasked that steering committee last fall with hiring a national level landscape architecture firm, someone that has done this work over and over again at a national stage. And we narrowed down to three firms, and we interviewed those three firms, and we selected Reed Hildebrand out of Cambridge, and they proved to be, it was a unanimous vote by the steering committee, and they've proven to just be a delight to work with, and the steering committee loves their work. And we launched the design process in the beginning of this year, so in January of 23, over several courses of open public meetings popping up where people are at the Ridgedale Festival or at La Paz or at different events. We've received several different layers of input. We had an open survey for folks to do online, which I think we almost had about 600 folks take that survey. So we're at that place again where I think you heard this about Broad Street. We had 3 different scenarios.
Sure.
We've had 3 different types of ways to configure Montague Park. One we called the Heart, the other we called the Sponge, and the other we called the Grove. And all 3 of those have different sensibilities about tree canopy, pathways, and how to configure the space. And I think we're at the place. It looks like we're at the place where we're ready to announce this fall in a festival in the park. One master plan that would combine two of those schemes. So you might see a little bit of the sponge and the heart, where we might imagine this center of Montague Park being very forested. So and include sculpture and different types of events inside that heart for play, et cetera. You might think of this as 47 acres in the middle of our downtown, where you could go and have an experience where you didn't feel like you were in downtown at all, like you were in the middle of a wilderness. And what an incredible opportunity, really, for our city. And so we're very proud of it. I think that gives you a snapshot of what we've been doing.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. I really appreciate you coming on today and talking about these projects, because if you think about all three of those things together you mentioned, that alone, added into the bin, added into the stadium project, our city could look a lot different in the next decade, 15 years for sure, because there's a lot of things going on for sure.
It will.
It's an exciting time.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
We have a city of opportunity right now. So.
No doubt. Eric, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.
I want to thank Eric Myers again for that enlightening conversation. We plan to follow up with Eric as these projects continue to take shape. During the interview, we mentioned some of the plans for these projects can be found online. I have put those links in the show notes of this episode. I also mentioned in the show recent conversations with two World War II veterans about the parts of Chattanooga where they grew up and how those areas look much different today. I have those links in the show notes as well. We thank you for listening to Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. This podcast is a production of News Channel 9, Fox Chattanooga, and Sinclair Broadcast Group Chattanooga. We hope you join us again real soon. Cereal is a soup you eat in the morning. Just thought you should know that.